I am Kelsey Ramsey, 34 years old, and a senior interior designer specializing in multi-million-dollar luxury hotels and exclusive resorts. You know that horrifying split second when your stomach violently drops, all the air leaves your lungs, and the entire world seems to go dead silent. That is exactly what hit me when the head of HR slid a brand new, non-negotiable contract across the cold glass boardroom table toward me. "We need your signature by the end of the day, or you can pack up your office," my boss stated flatly, refusing to even make eye contact. I stared at the bolded numbers on the page, my mind struggling to process the absolute absurdity of it. A 65% pay cut. 65%. As a single mother raising an 8-year-old little girl entirely on my own, this was not just a simple corporate restructuring or a minor demotion. This was an aggressive, targeted annihilation of our entire livelihood. I had dedicated the best years of my career to this firm, sacrificing countless weekends and pulling endless all-nighters to finalize award-winning resort blueprints. This was their ultimate betrayal. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, but I refused to let them see me break. I didn't beg for my job. I didn't scream or demand an explanation. I simply shoved the heavy leather chair back, grabbed my design portfolio, and walked out of that suffocating room without uttering a single syllable. The facade shattered the exact second I reached the parking garage, the moment my car door slammed shut, isolating me from the world, my lungs seized up in pure panic. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned stark white, aggressively gasping for air as blinding hot tears streamed down my face. How was I supposed to pay the mortgage next week? How could I possibly look my sweet daughter in the eyes tonight and tell her our lives were about to turn upside down? They thought this calculated, dirty move would quietly force me out of the industry, but they severely underestimated the dangerous lengths a desperate mother will go to when she is backed into a corner. They wanted a war, and they were about to get one. Before we get into the rest of my story, drop a comment below and let me know what time it is and what city you are watching from, just so I know how far my story has reached. 9 years ago, I walked into Whitaker Interiors as a junior designer with nothing but determination and a portfolio. Looking back, the sheer magnitude of the corporate betrayal I just experienced stung even more deeply because of how beautifully our shared history originally began. It was a highly respected boutique firm back then, widely known for ambitious architectural concepts, but severely lacking the heavy-hitting industry connections required to land massive, lucrative contracts. I was only 25, fiercely hungry to prove my worth, and utterly obsessed with the psychological impact of spatial design. While the comfortable senior staff clocked out right at 5 o'clock, I routinely stayed at my drafting table until the nighttime cleaning crew literally vacuumed around my chair. My unwavering dedication quickly evolved into tangible, undeniable results. Within 3 short years, I had rapidly climbed the ranks, transitioning from fetching obscure fabric swatches to leading entire creative teams for high-profile pitches. My subsequent promotion to senior interior designer was never handed to me as a polite favor. I earned every single ounce of that prestigious title through sheer grit. That relentless, exhausting drive allowed me to personally secure and deeply cultivate the 2 most lucrative accounts in the agency's entire history. First came Harrison Luxury Resorts, a notoriously difficult, demanding hospitality group looking for a seamless fusion of sustainable ecotourism and ultra-modern luxury for their massive Caribbean expansion. I spent 6 grueling months completely immersed in their brand DNA, ultimately delivering a revolutionary presentation that won our firm a highly coveted 10-year exclusive contract. Soon after came Sterling Coastal Properties, led by an outspoken CEO named Marcus Sterling, who was famously skeptical of external agencies. We bonded over a shared, passionate vision for meticulously restoring historic beachfront estates rather than thoughtlessly bulldozing them for cheap condominiums. I quickly became their absolute go-to consultant, functioning practically as an essential extension of their internal executive planning boards. These were not merely standard professional transactions. However, that meteoric professional rise came with an agonizingly steep and permanent personal cost. Elite commercial architecture does not adhere to predictable business hours, and my marriage was the very first major casualty of my towering career ambition. The endless international travel, the repeatedly cancelled anniversary dinners, and my perpetual state of exhaustion created an insurmountable, silent chasm between my ex-husband and me. We officially finalized our grueling divorce when our daughter, Clara, was barely 4 years old. Overnight, I was abruptly thrust into the chaotic, terrifying reality of being a single mother without any sort of reliable domestic safety net. Every single day morphed into a demanding, high-wire balancing act. I would ruthlessly negotiate multi-million-dollar marble procurement budgets during the afternoon, then rush through brutal city traffic to help assemble clumsy kindergarten science projects at night. Guilt was my shadow. I often found myself finalizing complex CAD drawings on my glowing laptop while sitting uncomfortably on the carpeted floor of Clara's bedroom, silently waiting for her to finally fall asleep. I sacrificed everything for her future. For a long, comforting time, the massive personal sacrifice felt completely justified under the guiding mentorship of our founder, Jonathan Whitaker. He highly valued raw creativity, actively rewarded fierce loyalty, and treated his core executive team like a genuine extended family. Everything drastically and permanently changed 3 years ago when Jonathan unexpectedly announced his retirement and quietly sold the entire agency to a massive, faceless international conglomerate based overseas. The subsequent transition was breathtakingly swift and remarkably brutal. The warm, collaborative studio culture we had painstakingly built over a decade was instantly replaced by a sterile, suffocating corporate bureaucracy. Middle management multiplied like an aggressive virus overnight, implementing rigid policies that completely stifled genuine innovation. Suddenly, every minor design choice required formal approval from an endless, tangled hierarchy of detached executives who had never even set foot on a dusty construction site. We became mere cogs in a machine. The casual Friday team lunches and spontaneous brainstorming sessions completely vanished, swiftly replaced by mandatory, soulless efficiency seminars and aggressive departmental restructuring initiatives. Every Friday afternoon, another empty cardboard box would ominously appear on a desk, signaling that another highly talented colleague was about to be silently escorted to the ground floor elevators by corporate security. The daily office atmosphere grew incredibly toxic, thick with an intense, suffocating paranoia as people stopped collaborating and started fiercely guarding their remaining client rosters. Fear ruled everything. I watched the systematic bloodbath happen all around me, observing the brutal corporate tactics, but I foolishly convinced myself that I was entirely untouchable. I directly controlled the vital Harrison and Sterling accounts, single-handedly bringing in over 40% of our annual operating revenue through my carefully cultivated relationships. My naive strategy was simply to keep my head down, completely ignore the vicious internal politics, and make myself completely indispensable to the new oversight board. I became the golden goose. I worked twice as hard, billed more overtime hours than anyone else in the building, and firmly believed that my sheer profitability would serve as an impenetrable shield against their corporate greed. That afternoon, everything I had built over 9 years was put on the line in one meeting. The mysterious calendar invite had been purposely devoid of any specific agenda, vaguely labelled only as a critical third-quarter portfolio alignment strategy session. Walking into the sterile, heavily air-conditioned executive suite on the top floor, I instantly realized this was not a standard project review. Derek Langford, our newly appointed Regional Vice President of Operations, sat rigidly at the head of the long mahogany table. He was a ruthless former investment banker with absolutely zero practical background in commercial architecture, brought in solely to aggressively maximize shareholder dividends. Beside him sat Vanessa Hargrove, the notoriously icy director of corporate human resources, whose presence in any closed-door meeting historically signaled an immediate termination or a severe disciplinary action. Neither of them offered a polite greeting or a customary cup of coffee as I took my seat opposite them. Derek immediately launched into a heavily rehearsed, painfully generic corporate monologue about challenging global economic headwinds and the pressing necessity for comprehensive organizational agility. He threw around meaningless business buzzwords like synergy, lean optimization, and strategic pivoting, while aggressively clicking his expensive silver pen against his legal pad. I sat silently, my posture perfectly straight, waiting for the inevitable dropping of the axe. Finally, he abruptly ceased his nervous pacing and planted his palms firmly on the table. He formally announced that the overseas parent company had suddenly mandated a complete, ground-up restructuring of all senior compensation models across the entire North American division. According to his deeply flawed financial projections, the lucrative legacy bonus structures established by our former founder were entirely unsustainable in the current market environment. The true, horrifying audacity of their meticulously crafted plan was gradually revealed when he outlined my specific future operational role within the agency. Derek explicitly stated that the executive board considered my ongoing, personal relationships with Harrison Luxury Resorts and Sterling Coastal Properties to be absolutely essential to the firm's projected annual revenue. Therefore, my demanding daily responsibilities, my intensive travel schedule, and my direct managerial oversight of these two massive accounts would remain entirely unchanged. I was still expected to completely spearhead the upcoming Phase 2 Caribbean Eco-Lodge expansion and single-handedly manage the complex historical renovations for the coastal estates. However, my guaranteed base salary, my carefully negotiated profit-sharing percentages, and my standard project completion bonuses were being completely obliterated. They were fundamentally demanding that I continue generating millions of dollars in billable revenue for the corporation, while quietly absorbing a devastating personal financial loss. Vanessa took over the conversation smoothly, opening a thick manila folder and producing the meticulously drafted legal documents outlining these draconian changes. She used a patronizing, overly gentle tone, the exact kind usually reserved for speaking to confused children, as she explained that this severe reduction was merely a necessary temporary sacrifice for the greater good of our corporate family. She heavily emphasized that I should view this horrific financial ultimatum as a unique, prestigious opportunity to demonstrate my unwavering leadership and steadfast loyalty during a difficult transitional phase. Their calculated psychological strategy was glaringly obvious. They knew I was a single parent, raising a young child alone. They had thoroughly reviewed my personnel file, they completely understood my precarious domestic situation, and they were aggressively weaponizing my personal vulnerabilities against me. They fully expected me to quietly accept the humiliating terms out of sheer, blinding terror of sudden unemployment. Despite the absolute chaos violently erupting inside my mind, my outward demeanor remained entirely composed, cold, and professional. I refused to let them witness even a fraction of the profound panic they had just intentionally inflicted upon me. I did not shed a single tear, nor did I raise my voice in righteous indignation. I slowly closed the heavy cardboard cover of the folder, deliberately aligning its edges perfectly with the sharp corner of the table. I looked Derek directly in his eyes, holding his steady gaze until he visibly shifted in his expensive leather chair. Legally, I am entitled to a standard review period for any contractual modifications of this extreme magnitude, I stated firmly. My voice was eerily steady, devoid of any raw emotion, as I clearly articulated my next move. I will take exactly 24 hours to have my independent external legal counsel thoroughly examine these new terms before I provide any formal, binding response. The sudden, unexpected shift in the room's power dynamic was immediately palpable. Derek's smug, confident smile faltered slightly, clearly annoyed by my bold resistance to his carefully orchestrated ambush. Vanessa tightly pursed her lips, hastily reminding me that the terms presented were entirely non-negotiable and strictly mandated by the Overseas Board. I simply nodded once, gathered my leather design portfolio, and walked out of the suite, leaving them sitting together in stunned, uncomfortable silence. However, the second I reached the perceived safety of the empty, carpeted hallway, the massive adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My knees trembled violently beneath my tailored skirt, and I had to press my back heavily against the cool plaster wall just to remain upright. My racing mind instantly went to Clara, my sweet, innocent little girl who was currently sitting at her wooden desk in her third-grade classroom, completely unaware that our entire secure world had just violently collapsed. I desperately thought about her upcoming tuition for the specialized summer art program she loved so much. I frantically calculated the impending monthly mortgage payment, the steadily rising grocery bills, and the expensive out-of-pocket cost of her necessary asthma medication. The sturdy financial safety net I had painstakingly woven for us over the last decade was suddenly gone, completely vaporized by the careless stroke of a corporate pen. I had played by all of their demanding rules, sacrificed my personal life for their profit margins, and they had effortlessly discarded my value. The overwhelming, suffocating fear of failing my daughter threatened to entirely consume me right there in the corridor. Later that evening, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at my laptop, my phone rang. The glowing screen suddenly illuminated the dark room, flashing a familiar name I hadn't seen in several months. It was Erica Ramirez, a fiercely talented former colleague who had wisely jumped ship shortly after our agency's initial corporate buyout. I swiped right to answer, expecting a casual catch-up, but her energetic tone immediately indicated a very different kind of conversation. Erica bypassed the standard polite pleasantries entirely, quickly explaining that she was currently thriving at Apex Design Studio, a rapidly emerging rival firm across town. She excitedly revealed that they were aggressively expanding their luxury hospitality division and desperately needed a seasoned executive to spearhead the completely new department. They are looking for exactly your caliber of talent, and I immediately threw your name into the ring, Erica insisted, her voice crackling slightly over the phone's speaker. You have completely outgrown that sinking ship, Kelsey. Hearing her confident, unwavering validation was the final trigger that completely dismantled my heavily guarded emotional composure. Sitting alone in the quiet, comforting shadows of my home, the heavy, suffocating weight of the day's brutal events finally crushed the breath out of me. I confessed everything to her. I succinctly explained the shocking financial ambush I had endured just hours prior, detailing the ruthless corporate ultimatum that stripped away my entire bonus structure while demanding the exact same grueling creative output. I did not sugarcoat the terrifying reality of my new situation or the immense, crushing pressure of providing for my daughter under those impossible constraints. A heavy, stunned silence fell over the line as Erica mentally processed the sheer audacity of their strategy. When she finally spoke again, her tone was completely devoid of its earlier lightness, replaced by a cold, sharp anger on my behalf. She vehemently urged me not to sign their modified agreement and strongly advised me to secure an immediate, aggressive exit strategy. She then promptly texted me a private mobile number. It belonged to Marcus Caldwell, the notoriously selective founding partner and current CEO of Apex Design Studio. He was expecting my call first thing in the morning. The call ended, leaving me sitting alone in a deafening, heavy silence. I stared blankly at the digital digits of Marcus Caldwell's phone number glowing steadily on my screen. Reaching out to a direct competitor was a massive, incredibly risky professional escalation that crossed a definitive, dangerous line. If my current corporate employers even caught a subtle whisper of me engaging in preliminary discussions with a rival executive, they would instantly terminate me for gross misconduct, completely bypassing the strict 24-hour review period I had fought so hard to secure. The terrifying prospect of sudden, zero severance unemployment briefly paralyzed my fingers. Yet, staying meant willingly submitting to planned financial ruin and accepting a profound, permanent loss of professional dignity. The choice was brutally clear. However, before I could even realistically entertain the exciting idea of pitching my extensive portfolio to Marcus, I had to deliberately confront the most dangerous legal obstacle standing in my way: the non-compete clause. I pushed my chair back, quietly walked down the dimly lit hallway to my small home office, and hauled a heavy, plastic storage bin out from the very back of the closet. Dust coated my fingertips as I frantically dug through years of archived tax returns and ancient utility bills until I finally found it. A slightly yellowed, thick manila envelope containing my original employment contract, the very same document I had enthusiastically signed 9 years ago as a naive, eager junior designer. I carried the fragile, stapled pages back to the kitchen, smoothed them out flat on the wooden table, and began heavily scanning the dense, incredibly dry legal jargon. My tired eyes tracked carefully line by line, navigating methodically through tedious pages of standard confidentiality agreements and strict intellectual property assignments, until I finally reached the restrictive covenants section. I held my breath, thoroughly dreading the ironclad language that usually trapped senior executives in prolonged, expensive litigation. I read the specific paragraph 3 times, completely refusing to believe my own eyes. The restriction explicitly prohibited departing employees from actively soliciting existing clients for a period of 12 months. It was a standard, heavily expected barrier, but the geographical limitation formally attached to my specific role was remarkably, almost laughably narrow. Because I had originally been hired exclusively to handle localized urban projects, the archaic contract only restricted me from competing within a strict 50-mile radius of the corporate headquarters. Over the passing years, as I rapidly transitioned into leading massive international eco-lodges and distant coastal properties, the new HR administration had simply appended minor bonus structures to my personnel file. They had never actually updated my foundational contract to legally reflect my massive global reach. I slowly traced the final printed sentence with my index finger, a triumphant, genuine smile finally breaking across my exhausted face. The document was an outdated relic. They had completely failed to lock me in. The next morning, I walked into a quiet cafe on the west side of the city with my best suit on. The rich, comforting aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans filled the air as I navigated through the tightly packed wooden tables toward the secluded back corner. Erica was already seated there, looking remarkably relaxed and genuinely radiant, a stark contrast to the hollowed-out, deeply stressed expressions I had grown so accustomed to seeing around my current office. Sitting directly across from her was Marcus Caldwell. He possessed a commanding yet surprisingly approachable presence, dressed in a sharp navy blazer and exuding the quiet, undeniable confidence of a man who built his highly successful agency from the ground up. He stood up immediately to greet me, extending a firm, professional handshake while offering a warm, welcoming smile. I took my seat. Marcus did not waste my valuable time with trivial small talk or meaningless corporate jargon. He immediately expressed his profound admiration for my extensive portfolio, specifically highlighting the brilliant sustainable integration I had meticulously achieved during the complex Caribbean eco-lodge phase. He knew intricate, highly specific details about my creative process that proved he had been closely following my career trajectory for years. Erica chimed in seamlessly, reinforcing how perfectly my unique design philosophy aligned with Apex Design Studios' aggressive upcoming expansion into the ultra-luxury hospitality sector. I listened carefully, maintaining my polished professional composure, but internally, The sheer, unadulterated respect they were showing me felt like a sudden, vital rush of oxygen. They truly valued my artistic vision. Without missing a beat, Marcus reached into his polished leather briefcase and retrieved a crisp, heavy stock folder, sliding it smoothly across the cool marble tabletop toward me. I opened the document, my eyes immediately locking onto the bolded compensation figures printed clearly on the second page. The initial base salary alone was a staggering 30% higher than what my current employers were paying me, even before their draconian, humiliating cuts. But the true, life-changing value lay in the comprehensive executive benefits package securely attached to the offer. It included an incredibly generous, performance-based profit-sharing structure, full creative autonomy over my newly selected project teams, and a premium, zero-deductible healthcare plan that would completely cover all of Clara's specialized asthma medications without a single question. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. It was an absolute dream scenario. I looked up from the glowing contract, genuinely struggling to comprehend why my own agency would recklessly throw away my proven talent, while Apex was so eager to fiercely compensate it. Marcus noticed my subtle hesitation, leaning forward slightly, his expression shifting into something far more serious and incredibly revealing. He quietly explained that the tightly knit architectural community was exceptionally small, and highly confidential industry whispers traveled significantly faster than formal press releases. According to his highly reliable internal sources, the massive overseas conglomerate that had purchased Whitaker Interiors was secretly executing a brutal, systemic liquidation strategy. They had zero genuine intention of maintaining our prestigious North American operations or preserving our hard-earned, high-end boutique reputation. Their sole uncompromising objective was rapid, aggressive asset stripping. Marcus meticulously outlined their hidden agenda, completely illuminating the dark, calculated reality behind yesterday's horrifying ambush in the boardroom. The new executive board was actively preparing to systematically offshore almost 70% of the foundational drafting and design production to entirely cheaper, unregulated overseas markets within the next 6 months. They aggressively slashed my compensation package, not because the firm was actually financially struggling, but because they actively wanted me to resign out of pure, exhausted frustration. By forcing me to quit voluntarily, they would completely avoid paying my substantial, legally mandated executive severance package while simultaneously retaining the highly lucrative Harrison and Sterling accounts firmly under the firm's umbrella. They viewed me strictly as an expensive, disposable liability standing in the way of their ultimate profit margins. The puzzle pieces violently slammed into place. I felt a cold chill. The profound depth of their corporate betrayal was utterly sickening, completely erasing any lingering, misplaced loyalty I still harbored for the fading ghost of the company I had helped build. I looked over at Erica, who offered a small, knowing nod of absolute solidarity, having narrowly escaped that exact same sinking ship just months prior. I then looked directly back at Marcus, feeling an intense, burning wave of pure, unadulterated clarity wash over my exhausted mind. I did not need 24 hours to consult with an external attorney, and I certainly did not need to agonize over the terrifying prospect of starting completely over. I calmly reached into my tailored blazer pocket, pulled out my favorite silver pen, and flipped to the final signature page of the Apex contract. I pressed the tip firmly against the thick paper, decisively signing my full name with sharp, bold strokes. I was officially done being their victim. That same afternoon, I walked back into Whitaker Interiors, knowing exactly what I was going to do. The familiar hum of the large format blueprint printers echoed down the main corridor, but the sound no longer held any emotional power over my racing heart. I strode purposefully past the rows of bleak, grey cubicles where my exhausted colleagues were silently hunched over their glowing monitors, completely oblivious to the massive corporate shifts happening above their heads. I did not bother to stop by my own desk to drop off my leather tote bag or check my blinking voicemail light. I headed straight for the top-floor executive suite, bypassing the startled administrative assistant, who frantically tried to tell me that the regional vice president was currently unavailable. I pushed open the heavy glass door to Derek's expansive corner office without knocking. They were completely unprepared. Derek and Vanessa were huddled together over a massive mahogany desk, quietly analyzing a complex digital spreadsheet that I could only assume detailed their next wave of ruthless staff liquidations. They both snapped their heads up in sheer annoyance at my sudden, uninvited intrusion into their private workspace. Derek immediately leaned back in his plush leather chair, quickly replacing his initial flash of anger with a wildly patronizing, overly confident smirk. He steepled his fingers together, naturally assuming that the crushing reality of my precarious financial situation as a single mother had successfully broken my spirit overnight. Vanessa casually closed her sleek laptop, folding her arms across her crisp white blouse while offering a tight, aggressively fake smile of impending victory. They genuinely believed I had returned early to submissively hand over my signed, severely reduced compensation agreement. Their absolute arrogance was staggering. I did not take a seat, choosing instead to stand firmly on the opposite side of the massive desk to establish an immediate, undeniable physical dominance in the room. I reached into my pristine portfolio and slowly extracted a single, crisp sheet of high-quality resume paper, placing it deliberately over Derek's expensive keyboard. He glanced down at the bold, printed header, his smug expression instantly evaporating into a look of profound, unadulterated confusion. It was my formal, irrevocable letter of resignation, clearly stating that my departure from the agency was effective immediately, as of this exact hour. Vanessa sharply inhaled, her professional composure fracturing as she hastily grabbed the document to inspect the startlingly brief text for herself. She immediately launched into a frantic, aggressive lecture about standard corporate protocols, loudly reminding me that senior executive management was legally mandated to provide a minimum 60-day transition notice. I let her finish her desperate tirade. Once she finally ran out of breath, I calmly produced the second document from my folder, the slightly yellowed, 9-year-old original employment contract I had unearthed the previous night. I laid it gently on the glass surface, specifically pointing to the heavily highlighted section regarding standard termination procedures for entry-level, localized staff. I clearly explained that because human resources had negligently failed to officially update my foundational contract during my rapid ascent to handling massive global accounts, I was entirely unbound by their modern executive restrictions. Furthermore, I legally outlined how their dramatic, non-negotiable attempt to slash my salary by 65% fundamentally constituted constructive dismissal under state labor laws. This massive, undeniable breach of our implied working relationship legally nullified any lingering obligations I had to facilitate a smooth, prolonged transition of my ongoing projects. I owed them absolutely nothing. Derek's face turned an alarming, mottled shade of crimson as the devastating reality of my watertight legal argument rapidly began to sink into his corporate mindset. He slammed his fist violently against the desk, aggressively threatening to bury me in endless, bankrupting litigation by enforcing the strict non-compete clause to completely destroy my industry reputation. I simply offered a cold, unwavering smile, inviting Vanessa to read the exact geographical parameters clearly printed in that archaic, highly flawed document. Her eyes rapidly darted back and forth across the faded ink, her face visibly draining of all color as she realized the catastrophic oversight her department had committed. The restriction explicitly confined me to a mere 50-mile radius, leaving me entirely unhindered to pursue massive coastal and international hospitality projects anywhere else in the world. I held all the cards. The deafening silence that abruptly filled the corner office was the most satisfying, beautiful sound I had ever experienced in my entire professional career. I looked directly into Derek's panicked eyes and delivered the final, crushing blow to their meticulously orchestrated asset-stripping agenda. I formally announced that I had officially accepted a highly lucrative senior director position at Apex Design Studio, and I would be starting my new role first thing Monday morning. I watched in absolute triumph as the devastating implication hit them. The highly profitable Harrison and Sterling accounts, which were fiercely loyal to my specific creative vision, would undoubtedly follow me to the rival agency. Their greedy, calculated attempt to force me out and keep the massive revenue streams had spectacularly, permanently backfired on them. I turned around and walked out of the suite, leaving them drowning in the catastrophic wreckage of their own corporate hubris. I was finally free. When I left the building that afternoon, I still had a few important calls to make. The crisp, late afternoon air felt remarkably lighter against my skin as I navigated my way toward the bustling parking garage. Stepping into the quiet, insulated sanctuary of my car, I securely connected my phone to the dashboard Bluetooth and immediately dialed Diane Kensington. She was my fiercely protective former mentor who had brilliantly pivoted into high-stakes corporate employment law nearly a decade ago, earning a formidable reputation for completely destroying predatory non-compete agreements. I quickly and concisely briefed her on the explosive, room-shaking confrontation that had just transpired, meticulously detailing the archaic 50-mile geographical loophole I had successfully weaponized against the incompetent Human Resources Department. Diane let out a sharp, incredibly satisfying bark of rich laughter that echoed loudly through my vehicle's speakers. She enthusiastically demanded that I securely encrypt and email her high-resolution scans of the original contracts the exact moment I reached my home office. She promised to aggressively scrutinize every single printed syllable by midnight, personally guaranteeing that my sudden transition to the rival agency would remain absolutely bulletproof against any desperate, retaliatory legal injunctions from my former bosses. She was my shield. With my legal perimeter now securely reinforced by an industry shark, I took a long, steadying breath and initiated the two most critical professional conversations of my entire career. I dialed the global headquarters of Harrison Luxury Resorts first, directly connecting with their senior development director to formally and politely announce my immediate departure. I carefully navigated the conversation with polished professionalism, citing an irreconcilable divergence in long-term creative philosophy without ever overtly disparaging the sinking corporate ship I had just abandoned. The seasoned director instantly read between the polite lines, completely bypassing standard pleasantries, to firmly declare that their massive Caribbean expansion was intricately tied to my unique artistic vision. He aggressively assured me that their exclusive retainer fee would be swiftly and permanently transitioning to Apex Design Studio alongside me. Next, I confidently reached out to Marcus Sterling, who was characteristically even more brutally blunt about the unfolding situation. He openly admitted over the line that he had fiercely despised the suffocating, sterile bureaucracy of my former conglomerate for months, enthusiastically demanding my new internal email address so his aggressive legal team could immediately draft a comprehensive transfer of services. They chose me. The overwhelming, dizzying surge of pure professional validation was incredibly intoxicating, but the absolute most vital encounter of my chaotic day was still waiting at the local elementary school. I carefully navigated through the dense city traffic, pulling up to the brightly painted curbside pickup zone just as the loud, echoing final bell rang out across the playground. I sat quietly with the engine idling, watching a chaotic, joyful sea of energetic children flood out of the heavy double doors into the golden afternoon sunlight. Clara spotted my familiar vehicle almost instantly, practically sprinting across the cracked concrete pavement with her heavy canvas backpack bouncing wildly against her small, fragile shoulders. She scrambled excitedly into the back seat, immediately launching into a breathless, highly animated ramble about a messy watercolor painting project and a minor, incredibly dramatic playground dispute. She was completely, wonderfully oblivious to the massive, terrifying tectonic shifts that had just violently reshaped our entire financial universe. I listened attentively to every single colourful detail, smiling warmly through the rearview mirror as we drove slowly through our familiar neighbourhood streets. I needed her to understand. I waited until we were safely parked in our quiet suburban driveway, turning off the engine and shifting around in my seat to face her directly. I carefully explained that Mummy had made a very big, very brave decision to leave her old office behind and join an exciting new creative studio across town. I deliberately used soft, encouraging words, promising her that this massive professional leap fundamentally meant no more abruptly cancelled weekend camping trips, absolutely no more endless evenings spent crying over a glowing laptop, and no more missing her important school talent shows. Clara tilted her head thoughtfully, her bright, observant eyes studying my face with a profound emotional intelligence that far exceeded her 8 young years. She unbuckled her seatbelt, reached forward with her small, paint-stained fingers, and gently wiped away a stray, happy tear that had managed to escape my eye. She flashed a brilliant, gap-toothed smile, whispering that she was incredibly proud of me, and genuinely thrilled that we would finally have time to build giant living room blanket forts again. My heart finally settled. The next couple of days were intense, as messages and calls kept coming in. My personal smartphone practically vibrated off the cold marble kitchen counter every single hour, persistently bombarded by an endless, frantic stream of digital communications. Derek Langford spearheaded the initial harassment campaign, leaving increasingly unhinged, rambling voicemails that swung violently between furious, empty legal threats and pathetic, transparent professional begging. They suddenly had unlimited resources. When his aggressive intimidation tactics spectacularly failed to elicit even a minor reaction, the faceless overseas corporate board abruptly decided to heavily intervene by dispatching their highest-ranking global managing director. Their incredibly desperate correspondence contained a massive, heavily revised compensation package that magically included a senior vice president title and fully unrestricted creative control. This new, heavily inflated financial retainer essentially doubled my previous earnings without requiring a single additional hour of grueling labor. I felt absolutely nothing. Reading those neatly formatted, highly lucrative offers glowing brightly on my laptop screen did not bring me any sense of vindication or delayed professional gratification. Instead, the sudden, miraculous appearance of all that hidden corporate funding only solidified my absolute disgust for their deeply corrupt, fundamentally broken organizational culture. They clearly possessed the vast financial capacity to properly value my immense contributions the entire time, yet they had actively chosen to deploy predatory exploitation purely to maximize their temporary quarterly profit margins. I refused to yield. I completely ignored Derek's sweaty, breathless voicemails and absolutely declined to engage in any messy, highly emotional telephone negotiations with the panicked overseas executives. I simply forwarded their frantic, multi-million-dollar proposals directly to Diane, firmly instructing my attorney to handle the mounting communication on my behalf. She officially rejected every single desperate overture with a singular ironclad legal block that explicitly prohibited any further unauthorized contact with me or my family. I remained entirely untouchable. The immediate, devastating consequences of my quiet departure struck the agency's operational foundation like a catastrophic, localized earthquake within 48 hours. The senior development director at Harrison Luxury Resorts did not waste a single second gracefully navigating standard corporate pleasantries before executing their massive, highly complex contractual exit clause. Their aggressive legal department swiftly issued a formal, heavily documented cease and desist order to my former employers, completely stripping the agency of all associated design rights for the sprawling Caribbean eco-lodge expansion. The agency bled millions. Derek frantically attempted to deploy an entire team of newly hired, significantly cheaper junior architects to aggressively pitch a hastily revised continuation strategy to the enraged hospitality board. He foolishly believed that a sleek, heavily rehearsed digital presentation could magically replace nearly a decade of meticulously built trust and deeply personalized creative vision. The global client explicitly refused to even allow his disorganized, wildly inexperienced presentation team past the ground floor security desk of their massive corporate headquarters. His failure was absolute. That monumental, incredibly public financial hemorrhage was immediately followed by a secondary, equally devastating blow, brilliantly orchestrated by the notoriously outspoken Marcus Sterling. True to his fiercely loyal and exceptionally aggressive business nature, he completely terminated the lucrative coastal properties restoration contract with a brutal, instantly effective notice of absolute withdrawal. He did not quietly transition his massive portfolio to a competitor. He loudly and explicitly cited the sudden, unacceptable absence of his primary executive design consultant as the sole, uncompromisable reason for the massive breach of faith. Their hubris proved fatal. His highly aggressive corporate lawyers ruthlessly dismantled the remaining service agreements, demanding immediate, full refunds for all pending conceptual design phases that were currently sitting incomplete in the firm's digital archives. The sudden, simultaneous evaporation of those two monumental cornerstone accounts instantly wiped out nearly half of the agency's projected annual operating revenue in a matter of mere hours. The sterile, heavily monitored executive suite that had previously orchestrated my downfall was now suffocating under a heavy, inescapable blanket of sheer, undeniable panic. The empire was crumbling. The sheer terror within the corporate human resources department became painfully evident as desperate internal memos began leaking out to the broader architectural community. Vanessa Hargrove, who had previously championed the ruthless restructuring as a highly necessary operational evolution, was suddenly forced to host emergency retention seminars in a pathetic, entirely futile attempt to stop the massive staff exodus. The rigid, suffocating corporate bureaucracy that had confidently tried to systematically break my spirit was now completely paralyzed by the astonishing speed of its own devastating financial collapse. Senior executives viciously panicked. The predatory overseas conglomerate had meticulously designed a brilliant, ruthless spreadsheet strategy to aggressively strip the domestic agency of its most expensive assets, while silently absorbing the massive prestige of its award-winning portfolio. Instead, their reckless, astonishingly arrogant miscalculation regarding client loyalty had spectacularly imploded their entire North American foothold, leaving them holding an incredibly expensive, rapidly emptying shell of a once great boutique firm. I observed the entire spectacular collapse from a profound, peaceful distance, carefully sipping my hot morning coffee while standing quietly by my kitchen window. I finally felt free. 3 years have passed since that life-changing week. The breathtaking panoramic view from my spacious sunlit corner office at Apex Design Studio overlooks the bustling downtown skyline, serving as a daily reminder of exactly how far I have climbed. I am no longer just a senior designer desperately fighting to protect my hard-earned accounts. I was officially promoted to principal partner last winter, granting me unparalleled creative authority over our entire global hospitality division. I meticulously built a fiercely dedicated team of 40 brilliant architects, visionary artists, and interior specialists who operate within a culture of genuine mutual respect, entirely free from the toxic paranoia that infected my previous workplace. I actively ensure that every single junior member of my staff receives the precise mentorship, public recognition, and robust financial compensation they rightfully deserve. We win together. The profound financial security provided by my new equitable compensation structure has completely revolutionized the fundamental reality of my daily domestic life. Clara recently celebrated her 11th birthday, and for the very first time in her entire childhood, I was actually fully present to bake her complicated, multi-tiered chocolate cake entirely from scratch, instead of ordering a hasty, store-bought replacement. The dark, heavy bags of chronic exhaustion under my eyes have completely faded away, permanently replaced by the vibrant, undeniable energy of a mother who finally dictates her own demanding schedule. We spend our long, uninterrupted weekends exploring remote, beautiful hiking trails across the state and building elaborate, sprawling blanket forts in the living room without the constant, terrifying dread of a sudden corporate email ruining our peace. My daughter finally has the fully engaged, incredibly happy mother she always truly deserved. We are truly healing. Conversely, the sterile, highly aggressive corporate machine that so callously attempted to destroy my entire livelihood met a spectacularly humiliating, entirely predictable demise. Derek Langford was unceremoniously terminated by the enraged overseas board less than 6 months after my departure, explicitly scapegoated and publicly blamed for the catastrophic, multi-million-dollar revenue hemorrhage he arrogantly caused. Without the prestigious, highly lucrative anchor of the Harrison and Sterling accounts to continuously legitimize their high-end market presence, Whitaker Interiors rapidly devolved into a hollow, insignificant shell of its former industry glory. They were ultimately forced to permanently abandon their luxurious, heavily guarded top-floor executive suite, abruptly downsizing into a grim, windowless suburban business park to desperately manage cheap, uninspired strip mall renovations just to keep the lights on. The overseas conglomerate eventually dissolved the entire North American division, liquidating whatever minor assets remained and entirely erasing their brand from the architectural map. Karma is absolute. Looking back at that terrifying, suffocating moment in the cold glass boardroom, I finally recognized the immense, hidden blessing disguised within their horrific corporate betrayal. The brutal, undeniable reality of modern business is that unreciprocated, blind loyalty to a faceless corporate entity will only ever result in your ultimate exploitation and profound personal burnout. You must fiercely recognize your own undeniable market value, meticulously document your vast professional contributions, and possess the absolute courage to walk away the exact second a company attempts to forcefully diminish your fundamental worth. Never allow an incompetent manager or a greedy executive board to convince you that your hard work is merely a privilege of employment, rather than a highly valuable asset they are incredibly lucky to lease. Your profound dedication, your specialized knowledge, and your irreplaceable creative talents are incredibly expensive, highly sought-after commodities that should never be sacrificed on the altar of someone else's quarterly greed. You are the sole architect of your own career trajectory, and you hold the absolute power to redesign your professional boundaries whenever they no longer serve your growth. Know your true worth. I decided to explicitly share this deeply personal, highly vulnerable chapter of my professional journey because I know intimately well how isolating, paralyzing, and terrifying it feels to be backed into a corporate corner. If you are currently sitting at a desk, silently absorbing a profound lack of respect while desperately trying to keep your head above water for the sake of your family, please let my survival be your absolute proof that a better, vastly more equitable reality exists. I want to express my deepest, most sincere gratitude to every single one of you who stayed to listen to my story until the very end, offering your silent support across the digital void. Please take a brief moment to drop a comment below sharing your own personal experiences with toxic workplaces, or let me know how you finally found the immense courage to demand your true value. Your voice and your personal triumphs possess the incredible power to inspire someone else who might be silently struggling in the exact same dark place we both managed to escape. I read every single response, and I truly cannot wait to connect with this amazing community in the comments section. Let us empower each other,